really snow and pretty cold. That's why I left the south of Brazil, because I hated the cold. And I wanted to
Oh,
move to the northeast is where I am now.
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you got the questions and everything.
Yes.
I was reading through some of your articles last night, and like whilst like I think at first glance sometimes some of the stuff that you've written can seem completely crazy. Like the language you're using is quite provocative, but as soon as you understand like the way you're trying to present it, it no longer
Hmm.
seems insane. You know, like you,
Okay.
do you understand what I mean? Like you, the
Yes, 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 yes,
the words like possessed
yes,
make it seem
yes,
like you're talking about actual demons and
yes,
hell, and
yes,
then you realize it's like, no, actually this is like it's an allegory
yes,
for something
yes,
different,
yes, yes, yes.
for just like it's like an ideological possession rather
Right,
than
right.
like a literal possession.
Yes, yes,
um,
yes.
which I think is pretty accurate at the minute, for the way that people have responded. The responses just have completely confused me. I don't
Hmm.
understand like where, like especially from the left, just generally, they seem to like beg for lockdowns regardless of like the human cost,
Yes.
and it like they're meant to be the people that care.
Yeah, and I mean, here in Brazil, who is really deeply negatively affected are the poorest of the poor. Yes, now they get some subsidies from the government that keeps them afloat, but it cannot go on forever. And most of them have lost their small jobs, and it's hard for them to return. And who were the privileged ones are all those working in the government sector or in some technological companies. These are the
Yeah.
privileged. That's very strange. And the leftists are fully in favor of the lockdown. I had discussion here at the university, and there was a strange divide in this direction. Yeah, being contra or being in favor, and those more liberal in the European classical sense were against the lockdown, and all the leftists were for harsh lockdown, just
Mm.
close down. They have fear in their minds. That was my impression.
Mm. I mean, it's kind of ironic given that like the entire last like 3-4 years, for example, with Trump or with Brexit, and the sort of left wing media were, or the left side of the media were constantly accusing all of the right wing voters of voting out of fear of like immigration or the new world or technology, and that they were constantly accusing them of like being driven by fear. And now that's exactly where we're at with what's driving their like support for the lockdowns. It's the whole world seems to have flipped on its head.
Exactly.
So to get going with some of the questions, like the term the Great Reset has kind of
Yes.
been, I had a laugh with Jeffrey Tucker from the American Institute for Free
Yes.
Enterprise, who I think
Know
I
him.
think you'd done some writing
Yes.
for actually
Yes.
a
Yes.
few years ago.
Yes.
Him and I were laughing because the term has been on this journey from it. It was like a kind of obscure term used by people in circles like the Rand Corporation or the World Economic Forum to discuss like the world transitioning into like maybe a post-carbon or a more technologically advanced, like in just progressing into the future that they envision as the ideal way for humanity. And then at the start of the year, some people started to discuss it, and it was banned on social media because it was associated with crazy conspiracy theorists. And then it started being used by like world leaders like Justin Trudeau and Boris Johnson. And it's hilarious, like this roller coaster that the phrase has been on. But like, what exactly is what is like the Great Reset? What does the term actually mean, and where does it come from?
Well, the term in this usage of restarting the economy and the society originates directly at the World Economic Forum. They have on their website, they have various articles about that. And in the publication, the book publication by Klaus Schwab, he uses the term. So it is not an invention of any kind of people outside of the World Economic Forum, but it was launched, this concept was launched by the World Economic Forum itself. And it is a scary term because this reminds of ideas that were fundamental in the big revolutions of our recent history, Western history. For example, the French Revolution. That was this first idea to have a kind of tabula rasa, to destroy anything that was before. As you know, they changed the calendar, they changed the name of the month, all these basic things, they changed the churches and so on. They changed the saints and took them in a rational form, so to speak. And this was strictly opposed to the approach of Burke, for example, of the British approach of a muddling through, of a transition step by step. And the other event that had a similar background of let's get rid of anything that was before is, of course, the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution is not Russian at all. It destroyed Russia. It destroyed anything that the old Russia was. And when you do something like that, it must fail. I mean, you can do that with a computer, and even with a computer, it's just the software. You make a reset, yes? You let the hardware intact, otherwise it won't function. So this is, in my view, yes, even the term, yes, in this original, more philosophical sense, and even worse, in the sense it's like you have your reset button on your computer, and all you have to do is click and the program starts again. Yes, this is an outrageous idea. It belongs to these dangerous ideas that in the past couple of 100 years we had in the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, and partly in other extremist revolutions that had happened during that time.
I mean, the other example that springs to mind is the Chinese Communist Cultural
Yes.
Revolution, where they
exactly. Yes.
It's a weird, like, what would you say to people who would say that, okay, you know, we clearly are, I think, in need of some serious changes in probably in our political system, or at least in our electoral system, in the way our economy functions. Like there's I don't know if you're familiar with Eric Weinstein. He's I think he's the managing director of Teal Capital, and he has a great podcast called The Portal.
Yes.
But anyway, his theory is basically that we've been on this great nap, or the big nap he calls it, since 1945, where we've kind of failed to update and I wouldn't say revolutionize, that's not the right word in this conversation, but he feels that we need to update and refresh some of our systems. Like he said, like for example, in America, he says, look, how many amendments have we had to the Constitution in the last 50 years? You know, it doesn't feel like our legislative bodies on either side of the Atlantic, and the ones I'm most familiar with, are capable of dealing with the 21st century. Like they're not able they don't seem to be able to make laws to, or even understand, like social media companies, the power of the internet. They don't seem to be able to like rein in the most destructive elements of like really extreme unfettered capitalism. It's not to say that markets and capitalism are bad, but when they go too far, there's problems get caused. And like, what would you say to people who say that we need this, we like that this might be something really positive, that we have had this moment where we can now reevaluate everything?
Well, I completely agree with some of the points. It is quite obvious that the system that we have built or was built after the Second World War had worked very well, I feel, for the Western world. And even if the developing world had joined in more openly, would have been better for them too. And of course, the Eastern Europe and Soviet countries and China, as you mentioned, they did not want to join in. And it was a very prosperous part of history, having learned all the lectures that the First World War taught and which the Great Depression had taught. So it was a lucky constellation that in the main countries of the Western world, there emerged a leadership that had a deep insight into what could be best for their population. Now, the first trick a little bit was in this world order at that time that from the beginning, even when it was launched in the 40s already, before the end of the war with the Atlantic Charter and the Bretton Woods meeting and so on, of course, the United States took advantage of their relative power position. Britain was moving out, so to speak, as a main candidate of world leadership, and the US knew that very well. And when you read some literature about it and go into details, the Americans actually wanted to outmaneuver the British, which was very clear at the Bretton Woods conference, where Keynes came up as the leader of the British delegation with some interesting idea about having a kind of world currency and a world national central bank and so on. Well, I do not agree with anything he said, but it was a different idea than happened then, where the United States took the power. Okay, we have the gold. They got all the gold. They got the gold of the Europeans in the First World War and the Second World War. So this was one part of the story. And the second part of the story is, of course, now the dollar will be the world currency. And there was a treaty, the IMF Treaty, which in its basic elements was a kind of, okay, imitation of the gold standard, but with dollarization. But the history, as it always is, when you have the power, you don't need to follow what is stipulated. So the United States just did not fulfill the treaty. They did not use how the treaty said that you have to reduce the mass of dollars in circulation when the base in terms of gold is shrinking. So in 71, we had the so-called Smithsonian Agreement under Nixon. And so you had a second phase. It was a big currency reform. So we had this Bretton Woods agreement then, and in the 70s, we had the new kind of, some say it Bretton Woods 2 that was happening. Well, and this feature has been ending as a body that would work already towards the end of the past century. One could see that it does not work. The overblow of currency creation, the overblow of central bank intervention, yes, the bubble making, yeah, it actually started in 87. 87, when there was this short stock market crash. The then head of the American Central Bank, Alan Greenspan, said, well, the central bank will do all that's needed. We will give you all the liquidity we want. That was the signal for the financial market. Okay, now let's go on for a spree. They bail us out. Yes, and they continue to bail out. So it was a very bad transformation that has taken place. And most of the problem, like as you mentioned, this strong inequality in wealth, all leads back to the use of the central banks at the end of the 20th century, starting in 87 and more so in the 90s, and then again in 2008, and you could go on until now. This gush of liquidity into the market, which benefits basically all this huge overblown financial sector. And this is something that cannot go on. That's quite obvious. And we knew that. We have discussed about that in economics I'm a member of the American Mises Institute. We've discussed that again and again, but it has been going on. And you can just look how the European Central Bank acts. I mean, this is just outrageous what they are doing. That's the bad side of the euro, that you have a mega central bank that's doing the wrong thing. That probably would not have happened, let's speculate, if there would be still a German mark and we still would have a powerful Bundesbank. They would not have joined in. But now you have the American Central Bank, the Fed, and the European Central Bank that do the same kind of crazy policy. And I mean, these two central banks alone, they control more than half of the whole world. And in the financial area, they control probably 90%. If you count in the British Central Bank.
Okay, so just so I can get this into like a small sort of layman's terms. So the Bretton Woods Agreement was essentially set up at the end of World War II to decide to essentially formalize and interlink like central banks like around the world. So in America with the Fed, in Britain with the Bank of England, and then across Europe with the number of separate different like national central banks. And then you're saying that then the decoupling from the gold standard, and then further with the consolidation of the ECB across the basically the financial power of all of Europe has been the reason for the boom and bust cycle that we've seen in economics through the last 40 years. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I feel that this is the heart of the matter. Yes.
So like just for people who maybe don't quite get what we mean, like why is all of our power financially centered in, say, the Fed or the European Central Bank or the Bank of England? Why is this a bad thing that we have like a system of like central banks? Like, could you lay that out?
Yes. Well, you have a money that is a political money. The dollar is a political instrument. It is an instrument to maintain the role, the leading role of the United States in the system, which has some good aspects, but it is coming to an end. And so you also have for the national currencies, when you have a central bank, the organization and the supply of money is out of the markets. It is not a market institution. It is a political institution. And so you always have a tendency to over-expansion. You have a kind of ratchet effect. Yes, this is a small crisis. Okay, increase the money supply. Now, when we have a kind of boom situation, nobody thinks about to reduce the money supply. They rarely do that. And if they do that, they fear that the market would crash, as it happened several times over the past decade. In the moment when the central bank tried to squeeze the money supply, the reaction of the financial market was just too strong. Now you have this funny thing, the central banks created the monster of a mega financial market. Now, the central banks, yes, are under the control of the financial markets. The central banks must increase the money supply, because if they don't, you have this mega market crash and many people have their pension funds invested and so on. So it's politically impossible to have a consolidation. That is a crazy situation. As they say, something that cannot go on will not go on. It will not go on. It is a dead-end street.
Mm. When you say the increasing the supply of money, do you mean things like quantitative easing or fractional reserve banking and this
Well,
kind
it's
of?
basically the various phases of quantitative easings that have been made, which is just buying up the bonds in the market. They started with government bonds, and then they went over and even buying corporate bonds. So it is a kind of indirect socialization that has been going on. And with all these operations, the liquidity in the market has been increasing. And where does the money go to? It goes into financial assets, into bonds, and the bondholders get rich by that, but due to the ever lower interest rates. And then after a while, they don't get any money at all because the interest rate is almost zero. So this game has ended. This game is over. Yeah, in the bond market, you invest in the bond market because you have no return. And so all the money goes into the stock market, and even crazier, in the stock market, it goes into a very small number of companies. All these big names that we know, where the private investor or usually who buys a fund, he looks up, does my investment fund have Google? Does it have Netflix? Does it have Facebook and so on? Does it have Apple? So you have an extremely distorted situation. Yes, that simply cannot go on. So I totally agree with this assessment. I think many economists who observe or have observed the markets for a longer period of time and have some insight and some historical experience are of the same opinion. Yes, we are approaching a crisis situation. Yes, definitely.
Just I'm gonna put some links in the description for people who are listening. For example, between like after the 2008 crash from 2009 to 2012, the Bank of England actually created 375 billion pounds for quantitative easing. Like that's £6,000 for every single person in the UK. And it's not like we saw anything like that in the pockets of ordinary people.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
it was 10 years after the crash, the average like wage for like ordinary people still had not increased at all since the crash. Like it was just 10 years of lost growth, essentially, where the only people who recovered were the very richest in society. So you say that we're approaching some kind of crisis. Like, what does that look like, and how do we hopefully potentially try and avert that? Like, what's the remedy? Is there one? I hope there is.
Well, one should have done the reforms at least 20 years ago. And this has not happened as long as it was still beneficial for the United States to go on with the system. And interestingly enough, the Chinese took a very intelligent use of the system. So, and then you had this other approach in Europe with creating the euro, yeah, which also seemed okay. We have the system under control. But all of these major new constellations that emerged, yes, just postponed the very essence of the problem, which is the outrageous money creation. And now there are many ideas on the table, yes, to get rid of any kind of fiat money system or any kind of state-sponsored system. So I would not want to go into the details because very complicated, like electronic currency like Bitcoin, which is outside of the government, which is outside of the state. That is an interesting idea as far as now, and it seems to get popular traction. And on the other hand, there is the idea to construct a new system based on some fundamental asset, which could be gold, for example. Yes. Or there are even ideas, that is my idea, I'm always for simple ideas in this respect, just to shut down the central bank and fix the money supply as it is. So you have almost a gold standard. That is the thing, the money supply is fixed and that's it. So you have nothing to do, just to shut down the system. And so the banks know, the financial markets know, that there will be no new money creation and they have to adapt to the situation. Maybe at the first reaction, there will be a kind of stock market crash, but the levels are too high anyway. They have to come down. So this is in terms of the relation to the fundamentals, as they say. Yes. So there are various ideas about that. The monetary reform is the main point. As it happens in history, yes, you can prepare for a crisis, yeah, by avoiding it when you take the steps in time. But as we know, it's even in private life sometimes like that. We always lack, yes, the energy or the insight to do things when we know it can go on. Well, just give it another shot. Let's just go on. And in politics, of course, it's even worse. So usually a crisis is the point where you also have a change of elites. This is also an important point. Yes, so you have a system, now we have a system where you have this interrelated groups between managerial class, political class, the swinging door system, you have the military industrial complex, you have the pharmaceutical complex, all in a very tight form. Well, it is different from the past and different from ancient system. It is based on this kind of meritocracy. It's not exclusive. Yes, you can move in through studying, through education and so on, and through your own managerial skills. So this also keeps it intact. Yes, but it has some immense weaknesses. Because it's like anything we do on this earth. If you build a house, yes, it must be maintained, and sometimes the point is here where you have to get rid of it and construct something new. But usually you do that in a way of not a total reset, of not a total tabula rasa, but you try to save as much of the past, of your inheritance, of the fundamentals, of your well-being, of your ideas as you can. And now the reset, to come back to that, they not just plan to make tabula rasa with all existing cultural points that are important to see, but also how human beings should live. Yeah, so it's like it has some kind of these elements of the Russian Revolution, or the Communist Revolution, better said. Yes, to create the new man, the new human being. Yes, yeah,
So
the homunculus.
yeah, so I want to move on then to the Agenda 2030 and the no privacy, no property thing. But just to clarify then, what about your thoughts about the monetary system is essentially that we need to revert to some point where the amount of money in the system is fixed, whether that's through Bitcoin, that for example, only there's a set amount of Bitcoin,
exactly,
or where your each pound or dollar or euro is linked to gold, for example, or you just like cut off the Bank of England's ability to just print money, because what happens is when you pump money into a system like that, especially through something like quantitative easing, where the money is essentially just injected straight at the top of the stock market, that you might be like spurring some kind of economic growth, but what happens is the people, like the people at the bottom, don't ever see those benefits, and the extra money that's created ends up accumulating more and more at the top of our system and with the wealthiest people, and it devalues the money that the ordinary person actually has. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, good. I've got that on then. That's good. I've understood. That's it. That's exciting. Because sometimes I like, I'm listening, I'm talking about economics, and I'm like, I think I understand. It's not a simple system. But so you've talked about you've criticized I think it's Agenda 2030. Basically the idea that according to the World Economic Forum, the plan or their prediction for the world in 2030 is that we will have no privacy and no property. And this is something that my mom has been like, she's very like big on like making sure I buy a house at some point. And I try to explain to her that it's not as easy to actually buy a house as it used to be. But why is it important for us to, in your mind anyway, to keep property, to own something? Because for me at the moment in my life anyway, I don't really have a problem renting. Like it's easy. It allows me to up and move quickly. Like why is it so crucial for you to say that we should maintain property as something that we as ordinary people own?
Well, that's a very, very good point that you mentioned. And of course, there are many things that we rent. Well, the most simple thing is you go into a restaurant, you buy the food, yes, but what do you rent actually at that time while you eat is the table and the chair. Yeah, have you thought about that? So we have always this connection between these two elements of renting, and never anywhere has there been a complete private property system. Yes, as you know, you mentioned buying a house, having a house. As soon as you have this house, it is subject to so many regulation. You cannot even remove some things, some wall outside without some authority from authorization by the government and so on. So and you're limited in the private property of using certain food and so on. Yes, but the point is, and I come back to Ludwig von Mises. He said, liberalism, what is liberalism in the European sense? What does it mean to have an economic system where freedom is a value? And he said, in putting it in one word, it is the ownership, and it's the ownership, the private property. Yeah, private property gives to the individual this kind of freedom that he has to grow his own personality, and also to give this kind of incentive to accumulate wealth. It's the part of the capitalist spirit to own. Yes, if you don't have that, and so you have these management companies that manage property, but you had this in a certain way in socialism. Yes, in socialism you had a house, but you could not do anything. You had no market for it. You were not really the owner of the house. Yes, you were almost renting it, even if you were formally had the right to live there. What was the point? Nobody took care of it. Nobody took care of it, and there was no dynamic in the economy of, well, let's use the term of the Marxist, of capital accumulation. Yes, capital accumulation in this real sense is an important part of the human being. And well, you can think about of a future economy like a communist economy. Yes, and the point is, why would you strive to build up a company, a new company, if there were no property to it. Yes, if I mean, what's the incentive to being proud of something? Yes, in this sense, and you can even go to the arts. Yes, imagine that I paint a picture as, let's say, a painter, and I am not the owner of this picture. I just, it is the state. I paint for the state. Yes, and just imagine what the result is. And we have seen that. Yes, at first there was some kind of boom in the arts at the first years of communism, because the old system, the old culture was still living. Yes, and then after a while, the so-called socialist realism, as they called it, was just a horror. Yes, and I mean, when you're not the owner and you're a private property, so these are my songs, so to speak. Let's put it in this way to make it more accessible to many people, not so materialistic. Yes, yes. So you are a, let's call it, you are a rock group, and all the music you write are for the state, and he lends it out. Yes, and it lends it out. Yeah, it just would not work as it would seem. Yes, and that was the idea of the communist, and the literature is full of that, that when we have communism, a new kind of person will emerge, a new kind of person who would be able to do these things without property. Yes, but I think it definitely does not work, because things and creations are part of your identity. Yes, and so let's put it this way: you rent. I exaggerate a little bit. You rent a Ferrari, and you're on the street, yeah, and then comes a nice girl, and she said, "Is this your car?" And no, I just rented it. I mean, I mean, that's the point.
Yeah.
It's not your nature to do that in these things. Yes.
So you're saying it's not just a sense of like that we need something to that it's nice to have something to strive for, the idea that we we'll have our own place that we can like build as our own. It's as well it's the idea that if we don't own something, then we don't take, if it's not ours and we can't like put our own stamp on it, that we take no pride in it, and that things will deteriorate because no one takes like pride and ownership and responsibility for something or some place or some company. Because if it's all rented and it doesn't actually belong to anyone, then no one has a need to maintain it and to develop it and to want the best for it. Because if you don't really truly own it, then you can't take pride, responsibility for it.
Well, I think this is just one aspect. Maybe the more important aspect is that you would not create. I mean, just think of kids, and the kids paint something, and that's what I painted. That's what I did. It is mine. I give it to you. I show it to you. I may read it to you, but it's still mine. So let's say children will have a very strong sense that, let's say, your boy painted something, and your daughter says, "No, I did it." That will be a big fight. Also, it would not matter very much. Yes. It's the creative part. The creative part is very important.
So like if you see Da Vinci, or is it Da Vinci who painted the Mona Lisa? I can't think of
Da
it.
Vinci,
But Da Vinci
Leonardo,
was Da Vinci. So you said Da Vinci wouldn't have painted the Mona Lisa if he didn't own the canvas.
Well, at least he could say, "This is the building I made," and he can give it away. He can sell it, of course, but it still is his painting, property in these things, intellectual property. Although he had spent it, still identified. It is not a collective enterprise. It's individualistic. I mean, this is probably the point.
Yeah.
And the main point in all of these systems is, does it open up human energy or reduce human energy? And if you think of such a system as the World Economic Forum imagines, I think it will pull out and negatively all energy in the human beings that are there. Just a couple of days ago, somebody asked me, wouldn't it be beautiful to have basic income? Everybody gets a minimum basic income, yes, and we have a system that would allow eternal life. Yes, so ideal combination. And I told him, what would a young person do in this respect? I tell you what it would do. He would do. He would sit 24 hours in his room and play video games. That's all he would do.
Yeah.
I mean, this is obvious. The life will go on. I can do what I want to do in 50 years. I get a new organ and so on, and I don't need to work. I don't need to educate myself because I get my basic income. And with these $1,000 or $1,500, I live quite well with my online. That's all I need, and some hamburger. And this is just life fine. This would be a huge amount of young persons who would fall into this trap. I'm quite sure. I'm quite sure. Well, maybe not. It will not affect me or you because we are still from the other side of the world. Yeah, we would go on because we are programmed in a different way. But the persons who were now born into such a system, yeah, who from early on in school, they hear, yes, my daddy lives on $1,500 and he's quite fine and so on. Oh, yes, why should I learn anything? Why would I create anything? It will suck energy out of the people. Yeah, they would be very lame and very stupid. It would be a total stupidity all over.
I mean, I guess like my understanding of how the only way that I think universal basic income could work, I don't think if you combine it with eternal life, that's going to be very sustainable. But my thoughts on it were always that you have to find an amount of money that provides like the barest, most basic life that you can possibly imagine. Like anything beyond like subsistence, food, and like a roof over your head, it should be your own like choice to pursue. So if you're happy with just living in a shack with like a bit of bread, then fine. But my thoughts were always that, and this might just be me, that it would be great to be able to free people from the need to just take whatever job they need. And it would give people maybe the freedom to kind of pursue their own desires for at least a little bit, or develop themselves, or say artists who can't, or authors, writers, anyone in like a creative industry that you need to take a lot of time to develop your skill, and that it could be a great way to allow people to do that, especially in a future when things are going to be automated more and more and more. Yeah, that was always my thought on it. But I think you could be right. Like there's definitely something about needing to do something, like say that menial job, that shitty like minimum wage job that you don't want, and to learn like that everything isn't like perfect and easy, and that you just have to do something in order to get by. You can't it makes you then appreciate more when you get to a place where you can like do a job that you genuinely enjoy. Like that was like a really, it was a really useful like tool almost for getting people to like realize when they're lucky and they have like a job that they can enjoy, to like build character and like build your fortitude and your ability to accept things that aren't maybe exactly as you like them. Like, I mean, I feel like my generation is probably a bit soft. We've had it. Yeah. I keep joking that we're all spoiled soft children. That like if our grandparents had all of the all of their rights and liberty taken away with very little explanation, justification, or
Yes,
vote
yes,
this year,
yes,
that they would have been on the street and we're all just sat inside on Zoom.
yes, yes. Well, as to your example, you can say, can you imagine that Charles Bukowski, for example, if you know this author, Charles Bukowski, would have become an author without these terrible jobs he had to do?
I
I
don't,
mean,
I don't know.
all great artists go through this kind, or Van Gogh or whatever great artist had this kind of yes, maturing situation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it sometimes when you talk about it in this way, it can sound quite callous, and you can like it's like, yeah, people need to have a shitty life to appreciate the good parts. It makes you sound like an awful like an awful person to some people, but like that's truly the reality. Like you mentioned the Soviet Union and the lack of great artwork that came after the initial sort of like spur of revolution.
Yeah.
And but like ironically, one of the greatest works of literature that I'm just starting to sort of delve into was Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And that was created because of the struggle that he had to go
Yes,
through.
yes,
You know,
yes.
the impact and the words and the understanding of the human soul that is in that book was born out of the struggle that he had to go through. I think it's Keith Richards who said that hard times makes great music.
Right. Yes, I totally agree. He's a good example.
Yeah.
They had their hard times. Even the
Yeah.
Stones had their hard times.
Yeah, but I mean, they grew up in the 50s in Britain when rationing was still widespread post war. You know, like that was not an easy time to grow up. I've heard
Yes,
plenty of stories
yes.
from my grandparents. So like the house they had to live in, like it was like 9 of them living in this tiny little house that,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
it's I think we just don't quite even understand how that would have been, like what that would have been like in a way. But yeah, so the another thing you've been sort of critical of, and or of the idea of that's kind of implicit in the Agenda 2030 is the fact that you're scared maybe of the idea of a world government. And like to a lot of people, maybe that like that's the future we always see in sci-fi. You know, Star Trek, you've got the world government, or in Futurama, you have Nixon's head is the president of Earth, and like it doesn't seem like on the face of it like a bad idea. Like sure, like a broad set of rules that govern the entire world would seem like a good idea, like a really reasonable thing that we would want to have like an agreed upon basis for how we would like all nations to live. But like why do you think why do you think it's a bad idea?
Well, having a world government is being sold as a means to end all wars. And so, okay, many people are fascinated by this idea. Then you have a police force instead of an army. And now this police force is in the hand of a small group of decision makers. And you can simply imagine what sometimes rulers do when they have a police force in their hands. And now we have a police force when we have a world government, which is global. And this means that the individual cannot escape. And this is actually one of the fantastic features of the European history, that throughout the formation of Europe, which is in some way a unity, but never united, yes, that you always could flee from one land to the next, and the governments had to do hard work to keep you in sometimes. But usually in
Where have you gone?
periods, it was unwelcome. You just went to another country, to another state. And in times of crisis, it was very important that you could move. Yes, for example, where I studied in University of Erlangen-Nuremberg, we had a nation of the Huguenots. yes, who fled France when they had another religion than the state religion. Yes, and Voltaire came to Britain, and British fled to France, and so on. So we always had this kind of moving around in Europe amongst the intellectuals to get new ideas. And so nothing could get too much out of hand. And when it got out of hand, it was in the European history always limited to a small, relatively worldwide, small region. Yes, so you had fascism here, you had Nazism there, you had communism there, yes, you had Frankism there. There were always spots of suppression. You had even in Britain this religious terrorism, Cromwell and so on. So you had all these kinds of small events of terror. uh, Naturally, these things happen, but it was always confronted by the others. And sometimes it just happened that all the others united, yet to get rid of this, let's call it cancer, within Europe. Now you would not have that anymore in the world. Now you can see California makes a mess with taxation, with regulation. Now businesses in California can move to Texas because we have still states in the United States, individual states like we have in Europe. It's still federalism. Now, when you have a world government, it wants to have all things, yes, to have at the same level under the authority with rules from above. And there's also this problem: the further you go away from the point where the problems are, let's say housing, let's say streets and so on, how can a world government manage that? This is an idea that is absolutely absurd, absolutely crazy. Yes, just look the problems already a country like France has because of its centralism, and how better off are countries like the United States, where the states have more autonomy. This is an essential part. I would actually, my argument would go to the contrary. Even the states that we have nowadays are too big. Yes, I'm in favor to get rid of Germany. I'm in favor that Scotland will be independent and so on. France must, uh, and this is a recent thing that we have this kind of nation state. Yes, that you can read the documents when the First World War started and people had to identify their nationality. Yes, in France and Germany. They did not identify as French and German. In Germany, they said, I'm from Bavaria. In France, said, I'm from the Provence. They had no idea of this nation. Yes, and I still admire the United Kingdom because you still have 4 football teams. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah,
In my case, I can say that because if we had a Bavarian team, I think we would also be one of the best.
yeah, I mean, Bayern Munich
Yes,
I
yes.
assume, yeah, but then it might not, like, Bayern Munich's players are not all Bavarian, just in the way
That's
that
right.
football
Well, they
works.
can be nationalized. They can be naturalized. They would. They would.
Oh, I mean, the Northern Irish football team, where there's constantly an argument as to whether people should play for Northern Ireland or the Republic of Ireland if you're
Right,
from
right.
Northern Ireland, which is a really strange thing. I've never quite understood why. Like, you might not agree that Northern Ireland is a real country. But I think at this point we're 100 years old, and you probably have to accept that, like, even if you don't agree with the British rule of Northern Ireland, that it is a nation state probably in itself. And I've never quite understood why people would choose not to play for the place where you were born. Like, if that's where you're from, that's where you're from. But I mean, that's just me. That's probably quite a controversial thing to say back in Northern Ireland. But, like, that's really interesting that people, like, before the First World War didn't associate themselves with like the nation of France or of Germany. It's the splitting up of like nations within Europe is actually something I came across in a book by this economist from Britain called Roger Boodle. It was called Making a Success of Brexit. And whilst I didn't really agree with a lot of his some of his conclusions or arguments, he put forward like a few different interesting ideas for how Europe could function better. And one of them was as you kind of suggested, was the further fracturing of the nation state into like
definitely.
and which was an interesting idea to me. I mean, like I've been on a weird journey with my thoughts about the European Union. Like my first
and actually nowadays it is much easier that technology helps us to do that. That's also an important point. Part of this nation building was because of the technology. For example, a system of trains or of channels, or of autobahn system. Yes, you had this idea of a nation at a bigger space. Yes, and now when we have, for example, internet, we do not need the national boundaries as a certain system. Yes, we could do it from local to local. Yeah, so this is an important point to make too. This technological, it will help. Yes, so the technology actually would make a world government possible in a negative way, in a terrible way, in a horrible way. And this modern technology also makes possible a fractional world, yes, where you move and from locality to locality actually, but in a human way, in a way of freedom. And wars would end in any way. Small countries don't wage wars, or they are not very problematic.
So your basic argument against a world government then would be that if it goes at some point goes despotic, then we would have no escape. Essentially, that yeah, because like one of the things that we discussed there actually before we started was I am not a fan of any of the COVID related lockdowns or regulations. And I have spent quite a lot of time considering where and which country I feel would allow the most freedom of thought and of speech and of just freedoms that we kind of like have willingly given up this year. And that if there was a world government implementing these rules, that there would literally be no escape. And people always kind of roll their eyes at that idea. It's like, oh, don't be stupid. Like a world government would never become tyrannical. Don't be silly. But I think that's quite a naive perspective, personally.
I think the probability is even higher when you have a world government to be tyrannical. Yes, because you have to suppress all kinds of small localities that want to move out. This police now, that's no longer called an army, would call the UN police force, yes, would have to intervene all over the world all of the time. And the lockdown is a good example, actually, because here you have an example of a world government. This time from the World Health Organization that announced the pandemic by changing the definition. Before that, it had to be grave and it had be come together with mortality. This mortality case was cut out. So any spread of some kind of virus can now be declared as a pandemic. And all these nations that did the lockdown and had signed a treaty many years ago, together with the United Nations and the World Health Organization, and they were almost obliged to impose the lockdowns. A horrible situation. And I think the lockdown is actually the drastic argument against any kind of world rule. And let's look who leads the World Health Organization. Yes, and how human, nice, sympathetic, and lovely these leaders are, and not how dictatorial and almost criminal they are.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this. Hang on, let me share this with you. I have just found, I did not know that they had changed the definition of pandemic. I mean, there's a thing here from the British Medical Journal from 2010.
Mhm.
And they
Okay,
changed
yes.
the definition of an
Definition of
influenza
influenza
pandemic.
pandemic, yes.
Wow, that's interesting. And that was after the H1N1 outbreak.
Yes,
Ah, I did not know that. There you go. Every day's a school day,
Mhm. Yes.
as my friend
For
likes to say.
everyone, for me too.
Yeah, that's strange. Actually, I wasn't aware of that. But then I think I remember hearing in like June of this year that they had declared the pandemic over, and then if they redeclared it, yeah. But the World Health Organization is very disturbing. I mean, when they just refused to, did you see that call where they refused to acknowledge the existence of Taiwan, where the guy got asked about Taiwan's response from the World Health Organization, and he's just like, "Oh, I didn't hear you," and then they went to repeat the question, went, "Oh no, we'll just move on," like just to completely deny the existence of Taiwan because it would,
Well, it shows the influence of the People's Republic of China in all these organizations.
Yeah, the Chinese government
They
is
have a large part of the African nations on their side. Just an example, and they have votes, and they built their empire. They are building their empire. Yes, usually they say, yes, China has never been imperialistic. Yes, it always been closed about itself. But what the Chinese are doing now is creating an empire. Yes, and particularly they grab areas like the imperialists of the 19th century, Africa. And for the Chinese, Africa is very interesting because it has the resources and the space that is needed for China itself. And of course, they have strong relation with South America. They see Brazil as their chamber of food supply.
yeah. I mean, yeah, like one of the things that like if it's almost become like a little bit not dangerous, but like a taboo to discuss ideas like things like the World Economic Forum or the authoritarian empirical nature of China, or the fact that they have very much corrupted and bought off the World Health Organization, or even just to discuss the phrase the Great Reset. Like a lot of the topics we've touched on today are often, like, as soon as you mention them, the response from a lot of people is like, "Oh, you're just some crazy conspiracy theorist." Like, what's your response when people come at you? I don't know if they say that to you personally, but it's something that I've seen anyway, reading stuff and watching people discuss similar things to us, that they just get written off as some crazy conspiracy theorist, even though they're discussing things that are like completely out there in mainstream like news sources, or like openly published in like white papers, like things that have evidence, and like you're just reasoning things out, and then you just like that term conspiracy theorist gets like thrown at you. Like what tends to be your like response or thoughts to that?
Well, first, I usually, when the discussion in this direction comes up, somewhat ironically, I cite Rothbard, Murray Rothbard, who said, conspiracy, everything is a conspiracy. Everything is a conspiracy. The Catholic Church is a conspiracy. Yes, every political party is a conspiracy. The Austrian School of Economics is a conspiracy. The Keynesians emerged from a conspiracy in Cambridge. Yes, with all these groups of Robinson, all these first Keynesians, yes, that set out to conquer the world of economics. So conspiracy are everywhere, and in each kind of state, each kind of company, each kind of university, each kind of political movement, you have the inner circle and the outer. You always have in a department, at the academic department, you have a few small persons who are the insiders. Yes, and sometimes you have the chance to get in, or usually you don't want to do that, but they're always in a company. Yes, you have these members of the company, workers of the company, and so you have always a group, an insider group that moves things and which are necessary. And at first they do not say much about their plans. Yes, because they are still unripe, because they are still not solidified. Now, to the term itself, of course, it has a longer history, but it had become popular in relation to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. When after this strange event, for anybody a strange event, initiated some kind of doubts, some kind of alternative history on a new narrative, as they say nowadays, the CIA came up with the idea to reject all these different narratives as a conspiracy, while the conspiracy, in fact, was the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I mean, this is the crazy stuff. Now we have another, the Twin Tower 9/11, which is also very interesting, which was also, whoever did it was a conspiracy. Yes, but now you come up with a different narrative. You are the conspiracy theory. Yes, absolutely crazy. Yes, so it is an accusation without any value. Yes, because anything you do, let's say we launch a business. I have some business idea and think, okay, we need someone like you and so on. I would not publish that and go around crazy. Yes, I found a new partner. Now we're going on. We keep it secret. Yes, yes, and we move on. And then, of course, after a while, it turns out, okay, that was it. Yes. So in terms of conspiracy, I totally agree with Rothbard that anything that is in the world is the result of some kind of conspiracy. You can go back to the foundation of the Catholic Church or any other religion, and you find also this element. The point now is where I have doubts and where I had some long discussion when I was a student. I had a good friend and his family was very involved in top positions in Germany and he knew a lot of things. And he always said to me, well, you know what? They are all stupid. That was his view as an insider, so to speak. Yes. Yes. He always said, don't put too much knowledge into what is going on. Yes, like when we talked about in economics, yeah, why do they increase the interest rate? Why do they do that? He always said, don't put, it's just a crazy committee. They actually don't know what they're doing. And after a while, I've come to this similar conclusion that if you think about now in my area in economics, how can a group, of maybe 10 people that are the main decision, decide about the interest rate? How can they decide about the exchange rate? Yes, this is so absurd, so outrageous. Yeah, how can, let's say, a prime minister or president who from day to day has so many issues, and I always talk to myself and say, look at these guys, look at the chancellor, or look at the prime minister, or look at the president. What is 90% of his time? 90% of his time is fighting the other party. I mean, they don't even, how much time does any of these guys have to really go into a matter? I mean, it's all fighting to maintain in power. Yes, be it in Germany or United Kingdom or in the United States, they're all equal in this respect with this system that we have, that fighting for power takes 90% of the time. Now, if you think about that, now you have to make a decision. Let's say about the lockdown. How much time do you have to have a solid, rational, insightful decision? You have no time. All you think, will it help me for my power grab? Will it help me to maintain or not? And now you have it, yes, with the lockdown. It is absurd because it was done, yes, to maintain power. People want action. This government does something, yes. And the more brutal the lockdown has been done by some governments, the more people admire. Oh yes, he's tough, she's tough, he's tough. Yes, he does the right thing. They protect us. Yes, and so behind that is not so much a conspiracy, although everything is a conspiracy, but a lot of stupidity and power desire, the desire for power. Yeah.
I couldn't agree
Obsession
more.
for power, being possessed with power, in the term that Nietzsche used the term. Machtbesessenheit in Alemán, possessed by the desire to have power.
Yeah, I mean, I guess none of us really, like, unless you've been in that position, you don't understand what that's like. It's very difficult to understand what it must feel like to have your hands on the levers of power, unless you've stood there. You know, it's got to be weird. But anyway, that seems like a fun place on which to leave things. Professor, it's been a pleasure. It's a lot of fun.
So, thank you for having me on, Josh. It's been great. I'd like to discuss with you the matters.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already and you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast and to our mailing list. And don't forget, my book, Brexit, The Establishment Civil War, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. You'll find the link in the description below. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.